Okay? When you ask archaeologists, how did this get there? They say, they cut a trench from the Nile across the mountain range into the quarry. And then they let the water in, and then they picked up the object, they stuck it on a barge, and they floated it down the Nile. But there's no evidence of that trench ever being cut. How do you lift up a 1,000-ton object and put it on a barge without sinking it? I mean, that is just not appropriate. It just doesn't happen. So when you look at this, you start to wonder, who were these sun gods? And were they able to go all around the world? Under the water in Japan, recently, pyramids were found. These pyramids are at 19.47 latitude. They're enormous pyramids. All the fishermen knew that they were there, but they didn't think it was important, so they didn't tell anybody. And here is another picture of these slabs. They're huge. They're huge blocks. What's really interesting about those is that, you see, you can't date a pyramid. You can't date a monument, because carbon dating only carbon dates. You need carbon. Rock doesn't have much carbon in it, not enough to date it. It has silica, and it has, you know, a certain rate of decay and all this. You can date how old is the rock, but that won't tell you when it was cut and assembled into a pyramid. Okay? So actually, archaeologists don't date the monuments. They just find the bones of this poor fellow beside it, or they find a fireplace beside it or something, and then they carbon date that. And they say, oh, it's this dude that built this thing. You see? But when the pyramid goes under the water, now coral growth starts to happen shortly after. And that's carbon datable. So now you can tell at least when the pyramid went under the water. Well, when they carbon dated these pyramids, they went under the water at least 10,000 years ago. The meltdown of the last ice age, when the water rose and covered the earth. There is over 500 flood stories in ancient civilization all around the world, talking about an advanced civilization that was there prior the sun gods, and the flooding that occurred that destroyed most of that civilization. Here we might be seeing some of the vestiges of that civilization. But anyway, these pyramids were found in Egypt. These ones are datable to 10,000 years. Check out this picture. This was taken during the Second World War by an American pilot that was lost over China. And he saw this pyramid, and he took a picture, and he brought it back home. He survived the whole thing and brought the picture back home. And everybody, you know, a few years ago when I would present that, people would say, oh, well, that one is iffy, you know. This could be a hoax. Well, okay, nobody believed him, except that the Chinese government in the last few years have released these pictures. There's hundreds of pyramids in China. And the Chinese government actually got the farmers to farm on top of the pyramids so that they wouldn't be so apparent by satellite. And the reason why, so here's the poor farmer that got the job. The reason why they were doing that is because they didn't want the Western world to know about these pyramids. Why? Because the legends that comes with these pyramids is that the sun gods built them, and that the sun gods were blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. As far as the Chinese government looked at this, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people had to be Europeans. And the last thing they wanted was European people being responsible for some of the most ancient knowledge of the Chinese tradition. So they didn't want those pyramids to be known by the West. They did find the mummies of these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in the high desert of China. Over 500 mummies were found. All very tall, absolutely not Asian people. And then you go to the forbidden city of China, the city that holds all the knowledge of the universe, all the knowledge of the sun gods. And at the entrance of the city is the Sphinx, the lion, which in both Egypt and Chinese tradition are the guardian of the knowledge. They guard the knowledge under their paws. And when you look closely at the paw, what do you find? A spherical intersecting pattern of the flower of life, which generates 64 tetrahedron grid. Guardian of the knowledge. Fairly old, but this section of China was largely rebuilt and fairly recent, you know. But it's all coming from very ancient tradition that's passed on orally throughout the ages. And that's why you find still the knowledge being present. Although the knowledge of the sun gods has been very, very confused and diluted throughout the ages. So, do we have evidence of the sun gods? We do. These are skulls that are found in temples in South America. This is in the Peruvian Museum. I call it Conehead. When the archaeologists found this, they said, oh, this is the result of skull deformation. You know how the ancient tradition, they would bend their head to deform them? Now, they did do that. You know, this is the bust of Nefertiti, for instance. Tutankhamun did have a deformed head. There's many skulls like that. But when you read the ancient texts and they say, they talk about deforming their head, they say that they did that to imitate the sun god, to become sun gods themselves. Now, if you deform your head, right, today, it doesn't matter how much you deform it. You will never be able to exceed the volume capacity of your skull. Your head might look really weird, but the volume inside will be exactly the same. In these cases, the volume of these skulls the inside volume of these skulls are over twice the natural volume of the human skull. The normal volume of a human skull. These are not the result of skull deformation. You cannot do that by deforming your skull. The other thing that's interesting is that the hole at the bottom of the skull here where the atlas goes in, the spine, tells you how big the person was, right? Because you can figure it out from the size of the spine. These people had to be between 12 and 15 feet tall. There was giants on the earth. Many ancient texts talks about the sun gods as being giants. These are very, very big people. And the fact that there's multiple of these skulls found in temples all around South America tells you that it's not the result of some deformation. These skulls were found in South America and Mexico. Here is some of the Mexican skulls. The early ones were South American skulls. This one actually has a larger volume than the comb head. And this one is the largest volume ever found. Mexico. And the facial features are missing, but the skull is intact, and it's enormous. That's the eye sockets, so you can imagine how large that forehead was. And here is each lobe, each hemisphere of the skull, of the brain, seeming to have developed independently in this case, and making it enormous. Go ahead.
On the prior slide, am I correct in saying that the orbits of the eyes are a good deal larger than normal?
Oh yeah, much larger than normal. This person had huge eyes. And there's all sorts of features on these skulls that are not normal. For instance, in these cases, many of the facial features in the jaws don't belong to an Homo sapien. They're a mix between various species that are not supposed to be mixed together. Here's Tutankhamun. Even Tutankhamun seemed to have a larger than expected skull. Here's his brother as well. Now, there's many instances in the Egyptian and the Mayan and the Inca scripts where they describe that the sun gods, including in the Bible, where they describe that the sun gods actually mixed and had children with women of the human species. And that generated a whole new species which was half sun gods, half man. So here, these might be evidence of this altered species, of this mix. And you would expect that these people would become pharaohs because they would have all sorts of capacity that the average man didn't. So here, we're starting to see a whole new picture of the history of human beings. And mingled in that picture is the information that these sun gods tried to give to man.